The timeline for all of this begins in the spring of 2019 and concludes in November of 2019. It only occurred to me recently that this story would be appropriate here. It's easily the weirdest and creepiest interpersonal situation that I've ever experienced, and it took an absurdly long time for it to all unravel. From the beginning, I felt like a detective trying to suss out the identity of my harasser. In the end, when all the pieces started to fall together, my head was spinning and I was overwhelmed with confusion, betrayal, and this sense that I may have been spared from something much, much worse. Let's begin. I had a friends with benefits relationship with a guy named Judah beginning in 2018. He came along during one of those doomed, let's open our relationship as a last-ditch effort to not break up relationships, and I enjoyed his presence but didn't necessarily feel a deep connection with him. My relationship with Judah tapered off amicably, with our interactions becoming limited to liking each other's Tumblr posts and occasional Snapchats. After a while of no interaction, Judah contacted me for some writing advice. I wanted to be genuinely useful, so I wrote a few paragraphs of heartfelt constructive feedback. He thanked me for my input, and after that point, our interactions pretty much all but ceased. Not long after I'd written this out, I had begun receiving some vicious anonymous messages on Tumblr. The first few were insulting my appearance and my art-making ability. I shrugged them off though. Random trolls are as common as gnats, and at this point, I didn't think anything of it. The messages continued rolling in, and they began to become more and more disturbingly specific. The harasser began to imply that they knew where I lived, and dropped that they knew what school I went to, which wasn't information readily available on my blog. At this point, I knew that I had to be receiving them from somebody that I knew in real life, or from a creep who was dedicated enough to figure out my full name from the clues on my blog, which would have been difficult, but not impossible. Given all that I knew, I started to suspect Judah. Extremely few people from real life knew my Tumblr URL, and he was the only person who I could guess any motive for jealous harassment, since we weren't talking anymore. I didn't think he was the type of person to act like that, but crazy people can be very talented at hiding their crazy. I blocked him on all social media and assumed I'd just be moving on with my life. Wrong. The messages became more frequent and even creepier. They began making fun of my disabilities and threatening physical attacks now. A common theme among the messages was about how being disabled makes me useless and undesirable. Strangely, Christianity kept being brought into it, as they claimed that my illnesses were a result of God's punishment. I had started to dread whenever the new message icon appeared, so I turned off anonymous messaging. This measure didn't prevent me from further harassment though, because this began the series of dedicated harassment accounts, with the first messages coming from a brand new account called Asshole Chaos Bringer. The tone of these interactions began to turn noticeably more occult. The messages started to talk about how Lord Satan is displeased with me. I blocked this account. From this, I became confident that it was a single person sending me all these messages, despite the fact they tried to sound as though they were coming from different sources. Hateful messages were, and still are, exceedingly rare for me, and there was clearly a person very dedicated to trying to freak me out. This only made me suspect Judah even more, but I didn't have enough evidence, and I didn't choose to confront him. After the blocking of Asshole Chaos Bringer, I began receiving messages from another shiny new account, Asshole Chaos Bringer 2. The messages from this account truly take the cake for being out there. Message 1. I almost feel bad that the demons I work for have been telling me to torment you so much. You already are the way you are. Isn't that torment enough? I almost feel some mercy, but this energetic warfare isn't over yet. Tonight, on this full moon, things will get crazy, and maybe I'll try to get the demons to leave you alone. Although, all they want is to eat your soul. You poor, tormented little thing, hiding in false confidence and false power. We pity you, truly. I pray you have protection methods. Message 2. I really don't want to have to bring this curse down on you, but the demons got me, and I have to do their bidding or else I'm the one getting hurt. I hope you understand. P.S. Selenite is really great. You should use it. I'm sorry for all of this. I'm so sorry. The Abyss demands balance and justice for what you've done. I'm so very sorry. I wasn't very moved by their prose and blocked this account as well. This triggered one more account being created to harass me, after which I assumed this person ran out of email addresses. A little while later, after a period of silence from this person, I decided to turn on anonymous messages again. To my dismay, shortly after I changed the setting back, that's when the hate messages started flooding back in, using the same language I've come to expect from my usual harasser. At one point, I received a heartfelt apology, clearly from the same person who had been writing the other hateful messages. But one day later, after I'd posted their apology, they instantly backtracked and started up the harassment again. However, at the same time, I began getting anonymous messages from someone who said they noticed from my photos that we lived near each other. They said they were interested in becoming friends, but were too shy to reveal themselves. I gently prodded this person to message me from their actual account, and they eventually did. This person introduced themselves as Elm. They were a non-binary person who was new to the area and didn't know many people outside of their work. We chatted for a bit and found some common ground. They were way more spiritual than I was, but I'm not disinterested in that kind of thing. So we talked about our individual theologies. Their spirituality set off a little red flag for me. I suspected that perhaps they could have been the one who sent the curse message. So I asked a question as a test. Do you know much about astrology? Previous messages had made extensive use of my birth chart when insulting me. They responded, barely. So I breathed a little sigh of relief and marked them off as safe in my head. Since this harassment was still an issue to me at the time, I decided to tell them about it. In response, they said, Jesus, that's honestly kind of scary. I'm sorry you've got some bitter person coming at your throat. After a few days, I had begun to consider this person a friend. We weren't the most compatible, but they were having a rough time, and I had the time and resources to help them out. After a bit, we decided to meet up. My usual weed man had run dry, and they had somebody that I could buy from. So I agreed to pick them up at their place, and we could go get the pot and then chill at mine. They met me at their apartment's leasing office, which they claimed was because they needed to pay rent. We picked up the green and went back to my apartment. We ended up driving way longer than expected due to being given a wildly inaccurate address. Therefore, I was unexpectedly tired by the time we got back to my apartment. On the way up to my place, they tripped and fell, twisting their ankle. I offered them an ankle compress to mitigate the injury, and they took it without an issue. We smoked and chatted for a bit. The interaction was normal, maybe just a little awkward. Elm had this manic energy, which would seem to randomly flap, after which they'd snap back to their frenetic disposition. My exhaustion from the extra long drive cut our hangout short, because I had to drive them home before I became too exhausted to operate a car safely. They seemed rather disappointed at this. I assumed this was just because we had only hung out for a short time. I dropped them back off at home and had a generally positive regard for Elm afterwards. I never saw that ankle compress again, just as a note. The anonymous messages began to dry up, although I still got them on occasion, and they were still just as nasty. I messaged Elm occasionally. I was intending to take them to a nearby formal garden. Then suddenly, I got a message from Elm. They said we just didn't have enough in common, and that they weren't interested in being friends with me anymore. I was taken aback by this, and a little hurt if I'm being honest. I'd never experienced a friend breaking up with me like that. Yet, I still didn't feel suspicious of them. By absolute coincidence, on the same day, my best friend Monica logged into her Tumblr account for the first time in over a year. She had received hateful messages, dating all the way back to spring of 2019, that were also clearly from the same person that had been harassing me. This felt like the nail in the coffin as far as damning evidence against Judah. There was precisely one mutual friend that knew the Tumblrs of both Monica and myself, and it was him. With that, I felt confident to proceed with confronting him. Immediately, he claimed he knew nothing about the messages, and I wasn't surprised that he'd deny it, so I pressed on. However, he mentioned something that caught my attention. He knew that his partner had sent a hateful message to me after I had written that writing advice. Apparently, they had gotten jealous after learning of our past relationship. I checked his latest Instagram posts. My heart sank. I said, "Wait, is your partner Elm?" He said, "Yeah, they are, but they insist they have nothing to do with what you're getting now." I said, "There's something fucked up here, really fucked up. I find it very strange that they met me without ever letting on that they were involved with you. And just today they said we can't be friends anymore." At this point, I assume it was Judah's heart that sank. He asked me some clarifying questions, and I told him the timeline of our meeting, let him know that I gave them my ankle brace. He said they never told him anything about us hanging out, and they said they got the brace from work. Just then, it felt like all of the information I'd gathered in the last year was swirling around me like a whirlwind. This whole time, the blame that I had assigned to Judah belonged to Elm. This person violently hated me without ever having met me, and used deceit to earn my trust enough for me to let them into my house. Elm had been actively harassing me for about 5 months by the time they reached out and revealed themselves, and those same lies continued for 3 more months after that. They had even lied about not being knowledgeable about astrology, so as not to implicate themselves and to avoid being caught. Days passed, and the hateful messages stopped suddenly and completely, exposing Elm's guilt beyond a shadow of a doubt. Judah reached out to let me know that he and Elm had separated, and that was the last time that I heard from either one of them. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't cut our hangout short that day. Maybe I wouldn't really have had anything to worry about. Maybe they were all bark and no bite. But they were clearly hiding some very deep troubles under that excitable facade. Elm, I'd be happy to never meet again. And for the love of God, stay out of my anons. A few years back, my brother-in-law bought another apartment complex in Florida. He already owned a handful in West Palm Beach and Miami. So when he said he had a new property and wanted me to manage it, I figured, why not? I had just graduated college, was planning on going for my master's, and it seemed like a good gig to hold me over. He booked my flight into Orlando, and I was stoked. I love Disney, and in my head, I'm already planning to get a year pass, hit all the parks, maybe enjoy some of that outside nightlife. But when I landed and we drove out of Orlando, that excitement faded fast. The property wasn't in Orlando. It was in a small town called Leesburg. Best way I can describe it? If a biker town and a retirement community had a baby. It was quiet, slower paced, definitely not what I expected. Still, I settled in. The complex itself was small, just 11 units, including my own 1-bedroom apartment tucked in the corner. Most of the residents were older folks, retirees, snowbirds, a couple of military families, chill people. But then there was Andy. Andy was massive. Now, I'm a big guy myself, 6'4", 250 pounds. But Andy made me feel small. He had to be at least 6'6" and over 400 pounds. He walked with a cane, kept his long black hair tied back in a ponytail, and claimed that he worked from home, though the rumor was he was on disability after a work accident. Honestly, I didn't really care. He paid rent on time, didn't make noise, and kept almost entirely to himself. His apartment was surprisingly clean too. I'd only been inside once to fix his AC, but there wasn't a beer can or pizza box in sight. Things stayed calm in the complex for about a year. Then came one night in November. It was raining hard out, typical Florida weather. Around midnight, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Joe, one of my retired tenants. Normally a happy-go-lucky guy, but Joe looked pale and on edge. "I hate to bother you, Sam," he said, "but something ain't right with Andy." I threw on a jacket and followed him to Andy's place. Joe held a finger to his lips and motioned for me to listen. I pressed my ear to the door. Inside, Andy was yelling. Not just yelling. It sounded like a full-blown fight. Things were crashing, shattering. But here's the thing. Andy never had visitors. Not once in the entire year that I'd been there. I knocked. Heavy footsteps thudded toward the door, and Andy opened it. He looked rough. Normally, he was well-groomed, clean, but now his shirt was stained, his hair greasy and limp, and he smelled awful. I glanced past him into the apartment. Total disaster zone. Trash, stained carpet, overturned furniture. All I could get out was, "Everything okay?" He grunted, said it was, and slammed the door in my face. I told Joe to let me know if anything else happened, then took myself back to my unit and went to bed. The next morning, I went by to check on Andy. I knocked a few times and got no response. Figured I'd just follow up later, but the day got busy, as it typically does, and I forgot. December rolled in. I started collecting rent checks. Andy's didn't show up. That actually worried me. He was always on time. I took myself up to his unit, knocked again. Still nothing. Knocked a second time later that day, and that's when I heard it. Moaning. Low and pained groans. I know I should have called the cops right then, but I didn't. I used my master key instead to open the door. The smell hit me like a wall. Vomit, urine, feces, body odor. A stench so strong that it made me gag. The walls were streaked with what looked like human waste, and the apartment was even more trash than I remembered it. I called out Andy's name. I dialed 911, and I figured that the moaning I was hearing was coming from the back room. I know I should have waited for the authorities. I could have just walked out of the unit and waited. But instead, my morbid curiosity got the best of me. And what I saw in there is something that I still can't forget. Andy was naked, lying on the floor, covered in a pile of filthy clothes. He was covered in his own waste, and it looked like puke soaked the carpet around him. Worse, he was covered in bites. And I don't mean fleas. I mean human bites. His arms and legs were raw, some of the wounds already infected, and he was bleeding out of his back end. My first thought was someone had attacked him. Maybe it was whoever we heard him fighting with. But the answers came a few days later. Andy was rushed to the hospital, placed in the ICU. His sister, who turned out to be his medical guardian, started piecing things together with the doctors. Andy suffered from multiple severe mental disorders. He'd stopped taking his medication weeks earlier. There was no other person in the apartment with him that night. He had been arguing with himself. The bites that I saw, self-inflicted. The bleeding from his rear end, caused by inserting a foreign object into himself with such force that he actually ruptured organs. This was a mental breakdown of the worst kind. He survived, barely, and his sister took him to her house in order to recover. I was just left to clean out his apartment. With Andy now effectively moved out, his sister gave me discretion to pack up his things for them to collect or to throw out, or whatever I deemed appropriate. One day, after shampooing the carpets and doing some other straightening up while waiting for the interior to dry, I stumbled across a shoebox in Andy's room. Inside were magazine cutouts, old family photos, and pictures of some other residents in the complex. These pictures included me. The contents of the box would have been normal enough, except for the fact that all of the eyes in the photos had been burned out with cigarettes. Some even had X's marked over their mouths. I didn't know if this was part of Andy's mental illness or some kind of delusion, or if Andy had actually always been like this, hiding behind quiet rent checks and an unassuming life. I'll never know because I never spoke to Andy after getting him out of that apartment. While I hope he's doing better and back on all of the medications he needs, I hope he never finds his way back to this complex, especially for that shoebox. Before the story, just some quick notes. Keep in mind, this happened over the span of only a month and a half, and everything that happened quite quickly. For context, my name is Kat, his name is John, and his mom's name is Karen. This is a story I've only ever told a handful of people, and I'll try to be as clear and as accurate as I can, as this happened just over a year ago, but obviously, I can't remember everything verbatim. And I know I made mistakes. I'll probably mention it a few times, but honestly, I've criticized my own decisions a million times over, and it's not useful to think about what I could have done differently. So please be respectful of that. Here we go. About a year ago, I had just gone through a bad breakup. He dumped me over text on Valentine's Day, and after having been together for quite a while, this was more than a shock. I was absolutely devastated and felt pretty bad about myself. It only took about 2 weeks, don't judge me, before I was looking for another boyfriend, more or less a rebound guy. That's when I met John. We met on Tinder and instantly hit it off. I was in my first year of college, studying biology, and he was in his first year at a different university, studying history. He was smart and friendly and had a lot of common interests. He was giving me some weird vibes, but maybe it was that he seemed a bit desperate. Although honestly, I was too after my bad breakup, so again, it didn't raise any red flags. After only a few days of talking, he asked me to go on a date with him to a play. I was so excited because that was such an interesting date idea, and I thought it was pretty romantic. We go on the date, and it goes well. He rides the subway back a few stops with me, and I tell him about my ex. He tells me that he can't believe anyone would let a pretty girl like me go, and that he would do anything to make sure he got to keep me if he were dating me. Now, knowing where I've decided to post this story, I think most of you can see just how creepy of a statement that actually is. But I was maybe naive, or just happy that somebody agreed that my ex was an asshole, and I took it as a compliment, seeing nothing wrong with it. We keep messaging and going on occasional dates after this. All was going pretty well. After a few dates, John told me he had really bad depression and anxiety. Now, it's important for me to mention that I also have pretty extreme depression and mental health problems. Those things, in addition to my breakup, had kind of launched me into a downward spiral. So it was almost a relief to hear him say that because I felt like he wouldn't judge me for having depression too. And after this, we would be able to confide in each other about our depression and help each other get out of bad mental states. After this revelation, we got really close really fast. We had only dated for a month, but we already had this intense relationship. I even thought that I loved him. Now, another issue with him was his mother, Karen. She was very possessive of him, and maybe it's because of his depression, but he couldn't do anything without telling his mother first. One night, he fell asleep at my place and forgot to set an alarm. When he woke up, he had 10 missed calls and around 50 text messages from his mom trying to find him. She had apparently called every hospital looking for him. She knew he was going to spend the night. She was just concerned because he slept 2 hours later than he said he would. She would do other things to manipulate him, like verbally abuse him or tell him he's a bad son if he didn't do everything she wanted. And she set limits on how often and when he could come to my place. This I wasn't happy with. I told him I thought it was ridiculous that she treated him like a child, that he's an adult and can go on dates whenever he wants. If she wants to know where he is, that's fine, but he shouldn't have to ask for permission. We had a small argument about it, but he was obviously a mama's boy, so I dropped it as best as I could. I still hadn't met his mom at this point, so who was I to judge? Another thing I feel compelled to mention is that one time he asked me to do a role play with him, in which I wear his glasses and call him specifically Sweetie. He was very clear that that's what he wanted me to call him. He told me it was a teacher fetish. I told him I wasn't into that kind of thing, that I was sorry. He asked me a few times and never really dropped it, but I always said no. This is important for later. After one particularly bad night, he came over to console me, and I told him I was feeling pretty down. His response? He asked me to marry him. Whoa. This was after only 1 month of dating. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he didn't return that laugh. He just stared me in the eyes. There was an awkward silence, and I said, "What?" He said, "I'm serious. I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." I laughed and gave him a firm no. He looked disappointed, but dropped it. I was concerned about this and confided in another friend. She said if it were her, she'd dump him. I thought it was quite strange, but really relied on the emotional support that he gave me and was very emotionally fragile at the same time, so I decided I'd just pretend that it didn't happen. I'd like to mention, I know I made mistakes and ignored the red flags, but when I was with him, he often implied or even stated that I was too mentally unwell or unattractive to ever get anyone better than him, and said other manipulative things that made me feel like breaking up with him would be really bad for me. As well, he often made comments about how he would off himself if I ever broke up with him, and how it would be my fault. Yeah, great guy, but I thought I loved him. A few days later, I went to his place for the very first time. He lived with his parents, so when his mom got home from work, I of course introduced myself. She seemed skeptical of me off the bat, and wouldn't even shake my hand. She gave me a fake smile and said, "Hi," then started focusing all her attention on John. "Hi, sweetie," she said, giving him a big kiss on the lips. She also wore very similar glasses to him and continued to call him sweetie all night. That was basically the only thing she called him. Sound familiar to anything else I mentioned? I was very much creeped out, but kept my mouth shut. His mom never really independently spoke to me, only ever talking to me if it was necessary, and I got this truly weird vibe off of her. I had only gone to her house and met her willingly, one time more after this, and it went basically the same, except this time I was doing my homework and she kept making comments about how stupid I was, because I couldn't do my homework and entertain her simultaneously. I tried to argue with her and got called a bitch, but John shut us both down and we just moved on. John's dad also lived there, but mostly said nothing, lurking in the background, or staying in the basement, so he wasn't really important to this story, just an interesting detail, I suppose. Fast forward a few days. I was still talking to John, but I think he sensed that I was growing distant from him. We had been together almost 6 weeks at this point. I get a text from John late one night telling me that he was suicidal and that he needed me. I had a midterm the next day and told him, "I'm sorry, I can't be there. I need to sleep and be at school bright and early for my midterm." He was upset by this, so I suggested that he go to the hospital and told him I could meet him there after my test. He didn't respond. After about a half an hour, I get a text from him. He tells me he's outside my residence building and his mom drove him. I told him again I couldn't go to his place. He says that it's okay and he just wanted to talk. I give in and go outside to meet him and go for a walk. He starts walking me in the direction of the parking lot. I get this bad feeling in my stomach. I don't know why, but I just felt scared. I say, "Why don't we walk this way?" and try to turn and go the other direction. He says, "No, it's fine," before grabbing my arm tightly. I don't know what else to do, so I say, "John, you're making me really uncomfortable. Why are you taking me to the parking lot?" I tend to be very concise when I'm stressed out. He said nothing, kept walking me in silence. I try to yank my arm away, but he has a tight grip on me. "John," I said loudly. He says, "It's okay." "Let me go home, John," I say firmly, pulling my arm away. There was no one else around us, and I was scared. "I don't think you want to do that," he says, rather emotionless. "What?" "Yes, I do." I'm about to cry at this point. I was so confused and scared. Then he starts explaining. Listen, Kat, my mom is in the driveway, and if you don't get in the car soon, she's going to call the police and tell them you're suicidal. The police will come here and cause a scene, then hold you against your will. My brain started going a million miles a minute. I lived in a university residence and really didn't want the police to pick me up where everyone could see me and cause a scene. I also had been to the hospital before, and my school had warned me of possible repercussions if I tried to harm myself on campus again, which it seemed like he took pleasure in reminding me of. Beyond being confused, I now felt betrayed, but quickly weighing the pros and cons in my head, I thought supporting my boyfriend when he needs me and not causing a scene would be the easiest thing to do, still not realizing why he was doing what he was trying to do. I tell him I'm not happy and that he's blackmailing me, and I don't want to be with him if he's going to treat me this way. But the threats continue, so I just continue on to his car. I get there, and there's his evil mother, with the most disgusting, ugly smirk on her face. "Oh, I was just about to call the police," she says. John stands beside me as I get in the back of the car, and he gets in the front. She starts to drive off. As the shock wore off, I realized that I was pissed the fuck off. I start yelling that they're manipulating me, and I go off on Karen for not only doing that to me, but manipulating her son, being a bad mother, and so on and so on. Don't worry, there were a few lines in there about her son being a bad boyfriend too. Meanwhile, Karen is screaming at me that I'm a slut and a bad girlfriend, and that I should just take my own life because I'm such a bad influence on John, and we have one of the most intense arguments that I've ever had in my life. I despise confrontation, and I honestly didn't know I was capable of so much rage, but fear and adrenaline does some wild things to people. Karen then pulls the car over, yelling, "Get out." I lunge at the door, ready to run. "But I will call the police on you," is what I hear as I grab the door handle. This makes me hesitate. Who are they going to believe? A reliable older lady with a respectable job? Or a slutty little autistic hood rat like you? For the record, I'm not autistic. Then she just laughs. The situation dawned on me that I couldn't leave. While pausing to think, with a hand still on the door handle, she escalated her threats from telling the police I was suicidal to telling the police and my school that I assaulted her and her son after he tried to break up with me. And even though the car was parked and the door was unlocked, I didn't feel like I could leave. She said, "In my car, you don't get to talk to me like that. So either be civil and quiet or get the fuck out." John stayed quiet throughout this entire car ride, not defending himself or his mother, not helping me either, just stone cold and expressionless. I started sobbing and begging her to please let me go, to which she said, "You have every right to leave." But I felt like I had no options. So I swallowed my pride, apologized to disgusting Karen, and I let myself get driven to their house. I tried texting my friend what was going on, but she wasn't answering me. Once we get there, it's like 1, maybe 2 in the morning. I wasn't sure because, of course, my phone had died. Great timing. Karen had been taunting and making fun of me the entire way home, and I wasn't even able to defend myself after her new threats. I was still crying, and John helped me out of the car. He held on to me as we went inside. I don't know if it was because he wanted to get me in quickly or because I could barely move, I was crying so hard. But they kept shushing me, and Karen raised her hand as if to slap me if I didn't shut up, in her words. So I stifled my tears until we got inside. Once we were there, John brings me straight into his room. He asks if I want to watch a movie, but I just lay down and start crying on his bed. He sits beside me and touches my arm in what would have been a comforting way under different circumstances. I pull away, and he just quietly watches videos and occasionally tells me that this was for the best. How I couldn't hurt myself as long as he was protecting me, and now we could both be safe together. His dad was home, but the whole time everything was happening, he said nothing to me and only came into John's room one time to give me a strange look before leaving. Weird guy. John's mom came in a while later and told me to sit up and stop crying, saying that this was best for me and John, and she's only doing this because she cares about us. I don't have anything to say to her, so I just pet their dog, and I don't make eye contact. She berates me, makes fun of me with no reaction other than a few snide comments from me that John would tell me were uncalled for, and more tears, followed by silence. Then she started going after me for petting the dog. Why won't you make eye contact? What are you? Then proceeds to call me a retard and other slurs. All of this made even more disgusting because her respectable job is that she works with disabled teenagers. I ignore her. Then she starts saying even more hurtful things. Now, I can take an insult, but she crossed the line when she started talking about how my mother was abusive and how I deserved it. And she can see why I was abused. Now, my mother may have been abusive, but that crossed a line. She had no right to talk about that, and John had no right to tell her about that. She then went on to say that she was a much better mother, and I should be grateful that she's doing this for me. The whole time I was there, she kept implying that this was in some sick way supposed to help me. I feel like I was only there for John to have someone with him, though. I lost it at the comments about my mom, and start yelling at her about how she's abusive, and far worse than my mother. How I hate Karen, and we have a screaming match for a while. Again, John doesn't defend me, and only says that I should listen to his mom. After more insults and yelling, she storms off, and it's just me and John left in the room. I tell him I'm breaking up with him, and now I want to leave. He goes to get his mom, who says I'm just having a rough night, and don't mean this. We both should just get some sleep. John gives me pajamas to wear, and I get dressed in his closet to go to bed. He was sleeping right beside me. I wasn't afraid John was going to hurt me, and don't worry, he didn't. At least, not physically. But I was still uncomfortable sleeping beside him because I felt betrayed, scared, and even violated. I wanted to leave more than anything. I felt like an animal in a cage, and that's when I got up and bolted to the front door, only for him to run behind me, grab me, and have Karen block my way. I started screaming and pleading for them to let me go. Please, I'm so sorry, just let me go. I was sobbing, and I was trying to be as clear as I could through my tears. Karen looked at me like I was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen, before scoffing and saying, "Grow up." John brought me back to his room, and this time locked the door. His mom came back and he let her in a few minutes later. She had some kind of pill that would help me sleep. I refused to take it. She kept insisting and I kept saying no. "I'm not trying to poison you." This was what she kept shouting, but I didn't trust that bitch. John took one first to prove they were safe, and it was clear after over an hour of arguing and John taking one, I wasn't going to have a choice in the matter. I pretended to take one at first, but the bitch checked my mouth and made sure I actually took it. Basically shoved another one in my mouth after she realized I didn't take the first one. After a while, I felt pretty woozy and eventually fell asleep. I still don't know what she gave me, but it tasted awful, and it was the kind to dissolve under my tongue. She had them in a clear plastic baggie, no label. I woke up the next morning and John and his mom were both in the kitchen eating breakfast. I saw my chance. This was the one moment I was alone. I got dressed as fast as I could, found my phone where John had hidden it, still not charged. It had my fare card for public transit in the case though, so I pocketed it and quietly snuck to the door. Nothing had ever been so intense for me before this moment. I put on my shoes really quickly, opened the door, and I fucking ran. I ran like the wind, on the verge of tears once more and shaking. I didn't know the neighborhood, and I didn't know how to get home, but I knew that I needed to get away. I don't know if they chased me or not, or if they even noticed right away. The dog had stayed quiet, so that probably helped. I found a bus stop and got on the first one that showed up. I pull out my card and tap it. Just my luck. No money on it. My brain buzzed. I had no way to get home, but I needed to be on this bus. I had to get away. The bus driver shrugged and said, "You should have money on that card." Meanwhile, I was stuck staring at it, Then all these tears burst from my face. I practically fell over, I was crying so hard, trying to explain to the bus driver what was happening, but all that came out were more crying sounds. This prompted the bus driver to ask if I was okay, and the first word that I was able to finally get out was no, but that only made me cry harder. He just quietly handed me a transfer. I thanked him and sat down really quickly, noticing everyone now staring at me. I just put up my hood and tried to cry quietly. I still don't know how to get home from here, but I realized the bus was going to a subway station, and even though it was a long ride, I could get home from the station. As soon as we got there, I run onto the subway, still crying and shaking. I imagine I was quite the sight. The subway eventually got to my school. Then I realized I couldn't go home. John knew where I lived, and I still feared that they were going to call the police on me. I didn't know what to do, but when I saw someone with a phone charger, I ran over and asked them if I could please charge my phone, that it was an emergency. Typical millennial me didn't know my friend's phone number, so there would have been no use to go find a payphone. I charged my phone, face covered in tears and probably smudged mascara, and I was immediately able to text my friend. I told her the night before my phone died and that John and Karen wouldn't let me leave their car. She had sent quite a few messages and had apparently tried to come to my house to look for me. I told her where I was and asked if I could go to her place. I got many messages from John as well. John tried saying that he attempted to take his own life, that he needed me, that I needed him, and that I'm making a huge mistake. Absolutely anything and everything to try to make me respond. Now, I'm sure you guys will judge me for this, but I went to visit him in the hospital. I don't know why, after all that, I decided to do this, but I did. After I got to the ER, his mom then told the nurse that I was also threatening suicide and needed to be put on suicide watch. The nurses took me aside, and they asked me questions, but of course I responded with, "No, I'm not suicidal." And I was legally an adult, so they couldn't take Karen's word over mine. Thus, they didn't hospitalize me. I told John unequivocally we were over, and I hope that he gets better soon. But he was mad at me. He said his mom told him how I was suicidal, and how she said that she heard the nurses talking to each other about how I was lying to get attention. All this other BS. I tried to defend myself to him, but I just left defeated. Gave Karen the middle finger and literally ran the fuck out of that building. Never even looked back. I crashed at my friend's place and slept on her floor for about a week. A while later, I got a text from one of John's friends, basically insinuating that he had succeeded at taking his own life, and it was my fault. I told the guy that after what that family did to me, they can all go to hell, and for him to never message me again before blocking that number. I have no idea if John is alive or not to this day. Some of you might have noticed that up until this point of the story, I never called the police. I did speak to a police officer about it eventually, along with my concerns about how Karen might be more believable than me, and how I didn't have much evidence that any of this ever occurred. They said if I want, I could file a report, but honestly, I never did. I wanted nothing to do with this family anymore. To those who might want to say I wasn't actually kidnapped because I wasn't tied up or anything, which someone has said to me before. I may have been allowed to leave physically, but emotionally, they made me feel like I didn't have a choice in staying or leaving. And eventually, they did drug me, so I don't know, man. So, to John, but mostly Karen, let's never meet again, you disgusting